today. Greek debt problems, its impact on the Eurozone, and Bitcoin to the rescue when governments try to save themselves first. Your host is Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 21 in 2015. Two events have been prominent in the past week. One is the Patriot Act debate in the USA, which regards whether the NSA shall be allowed to continue spying on, well, frankly, not just your average American, but the entire world. However, a more interesting development is happening in a small country in Europe right now, namely Greece. A small headline said that Greece would not be able to pay its debt to something called the IMF. The IMF is the International Monetary Fund, and what it means that Greece is unable to pay that debt means that, frankly, Greece is going bankrupt, in the most literal sense of the word. To put this in perspective, Greece did pay its last installment on its debt to the IMF, its May installment, by essentially taking a loan with the IMF and using the money from that loan to pay its installment on its own old loan. You can see how this is not very long-term thinking, or perhaps it's frankly just scrambling for funds. Anyway, Greece has now come clean and said it will not be able to pay its loan to the IMF on June 5. That's fairly much around the corner, isn't it? And this matters because in 30 days from the installment due date, the IMF may declare Greece bankrupt. If that happens, and do keep in mind now, Greek bonds are already way below the junk level of investments in most ratings. But if Greece goes bankrupt at the country level, we're talking about a country going bankrupt here, what happens is that a number of countries won't be able to pay their installments, their loans, as going bankrupt by definition means that your loans are void and null. So if Greek loans default, and I should mention that the market has rated the risk for that at 87% for some time, using so-called credit default swaps where you can weigh the risk of somebody defaulting. But if Greece falls, then Italy won't be able to pay its debt. And if Italy won't be able to pay its debt, then Spain and Portugal won't be able to pay their debts. And if Spain and Portugal can't pay their debt, then France can't either. The problem isn't a small country in Europe, Greece. The problem is the cross-exposure all across Europe, where everybody is holding everybody else's debt. And that means it's all a big pile of domino bricks. If one falls, the rest fall. The reason we've been able to come to this point is that the euro was a very weird construct from the beginning. It essentially stipulated that everybody has as good credit as the country with the best credit in the Eurozone, which was Germany. So Greece, which had awful credit based on its, frankly, credit history, all of a sudden had Germany covering its back. It had a German credit card as a guarantee for its loans. Not that Germany had anything to say in how Greece spent their loans or spent their money, which is why the Eurozone was rather fragile from the get-go. And there are two outcomes of this that we all need to keep in mind very closely. The first is that both the United States and China are in a state of huge bubbles. The US dollar was precariously close to collapsing in 2009. And when I say collapsing, I mean crashing to the floor, burning to ashes. China has been borrowing against future growth for quite some time now. Only that growth is starting to not appear. At a household level, it's the equivalent of taking a huge loan and taking more huge loans, counting on the fact that you will continue to get good bonuses and future raises. And then all of a sudden those raises don't appear, but you've still taken out the loans already. The US and China are both in this situation. And Greece, well, it has been doing pretty much the exact same thing in May. It took a new loan to pay off the installment on its old, cheaper loan. And the second thing that this could lead to, if the domino starts to fall across Europe, then you have three equi-strong economies in the world right now. You have the US, Europe, and China. If one of them falls, the other two will fall along with it. And this is how this plays out in liberties, because a government will always save itself first. A government will not care for its citizens until that government considers its own needs filled. It's easy to see what happened in Cyprus when the country was facing bankruptcy, and the government just went in to all bank accounts and took 40% of people's savings above a certain threshold. The same thing can be expected to happen if the Greek default is allowed to play out, which is where Bitcoin comes in yet again. Andreas Antonopoulos has stated quite insightfully that Bitcoin does not need to outcompete the legacy banking system. It only needs to survive while the legacy banking system falls over. And that seems more and more like an inevitability. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin to replace it. It needs some usability, but it's there. I'm Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.